And so even if you only had that food occasionally, you could stay at a sustained state of irritation. But because it doesn't happen instantly, it's very hard for most people to figure out, oh, it was that, because it's something you had 3 days ago.
Welcome to Personalized by Vitamin Lab, the show where we dive deep into the world of personalization in healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. David Dizer. Please remember that the following discussion is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease. Speak with your healthcare practitioner first before integrating anything that you learned today. Join us as we explore the remarkable stories, breakthroughs, and possibilities that come with the pursuit of personalized healthcare. Welcome back to Personalized by Vitamin Lab. I'm your host, Dr. David Dizer, and today on the show, we're joined by Dr. Joe Klassen, a passionate naturopathic doctor and National Clinician Support Specialist for Life Labs, Canada's largest medical lab. Dr. Klassen brings a wealth of expertise in functional medicine, food as medicine, and personalized health strategies. His mission? To help patients uncover the root causes of their symptoms, moving beyond quick fixes to deeper understanding and lasting solutions. From food sensitivity and hormone testing to the healing power of nature, Dr. Klassen is here to inspire your journey toward vibrant health. Let's dig in. Welcome back to Personalized. I'm here with Dr. Joe Klassen. Welcome, doctor. How are you doing today?
I am well. I'm well. Thanks for the invite. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. No problem. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you. I've been doing food sensitivity testing for 10 years now, and you are my go-to source. You're my person when I have questions, which is often.
And I'm always happy to hear from you. You know that.
Thanks. How long have you been evaluating food sensitivity tests?
Well, I've been practicing for 19 years. I've been doing the testing for about 18.
Nice.
I've been the clinician support for Rocky Mountain Analytical Lab, the division of Life Labs, for 11 years. And I've been the medical director for the last 3.
Wow, nice. Okay, that makes sense then. So you've been the medical director just a little bit longer than I've been calling you. Maybe the first one to call you. Oh gosh. No, I'm really grateful for your support. We, in our medicine, as you know, one of the key reasons people come to us is because of digestive concerns. It's likely the most common thing in most people's practices here in British Columbia, Canada. And there's so many things that can go wrong in the digestive tract. And one of those things is our immune system can react to foods, and we can develop food sensitivities. It's a little bit separate from allergy. Could you please explain what food sensitivities are for us?
Sure. And, as I'm prone to, I'm going to give you even more than that. I'm going to talk about intolerance as well. And so, when I say allergy, you conjure a picture that looks like hay fever or, at its worst, a bee sting going bad, right? Think Will Smith in Hitch. But that's an allergy, and that's what we call a type 1 in medicine, and it involves histamine. It's antibody type E, and most people know very quickly. I roll in the grass, I get a rash, right? I eat peanuts, I blow up. You take antihistamines, things get quiet pretty quickly. But these tend to occur within half an hour of exposure, for the most part, or maybe a few hours. But maybe you know somebody who is a celiac. And they have a significant allergy, immune problem with gluten. But they do not look like they have hay fever because it's a type 3 allergy, or what we call an IgG reaction. It does not moderate histamine. It releases other inflammatory chemicals, which in turn fan the flames of inflammation rather non-specifically. So what is your weak spot? If it's your airway, and does it frustrate your asthma? If it's your digestion, does it cause you, grief? The central immune system, does it fan your anxiety and your depression?
Right.
But there's another part of that mechanism, and that antibody-antigen complex, like a lock and a key, very specific. When they bind irreversibly, they may also settle in a tissue and invite a cell-mediated attack in situ, in that spot. So that's how you get the physical damage of celiac in a type 3 allergy. And so that we don't give people false confidence when we test a type 3, the IgG test that we're talking about today, food sensitivity, we use that term sensitivity versus allergy, so that somebody with a peanut reaction that could be life-threatening doesn't get a false sense of security when we're doing an IgG test that says, oh, you do not have IgG against peanut. So that's the allergy versus sensitivity. And then an intolerance, and everybody's heard lactose intolerance. It can be very uncomfortable, but it does not involve the immune system. And that's the key to intolerance. You fail to fully digest these foods, in that case lactose, but it can be other small sugars, and they survive farther down the GI tract rather than breaking apart and being absorbed. So they serve as food for dysbiotic organisms who ferment that into gas and produce proteins that give you a reaction, diarrhea, etc. So it's very uncomfortable, but it's not an allergy. It's not an immune phenomenon.
Makes total sense. Is there any way for us to figure out, like, even without testing, knowing based on symptoms if someone is dealing with an allergy or an intolerance?
Well, there's a simple way. If somebody comes in and says, Joe, I have this issue, it comes up, and I think it's an allergy, but I take, am I allowed to say Benadryl, or do I have to say a classic second generation antihistamine that everybody happens to have handy, and they take it and it doesn't seem to calm things down? It's probably not a type 1 allergy.
Yes.
If they say, but the doc gave me some steroid cream or an oral steroid, and boy, that did make a difference. It didn't cure it by any means, and as soon as I stopped the meds, it's still there. But that helps in a way that the antihistamines don't. You can be pretty confident that it's an IgG or type 3 reaction.
Okay, that makes total sense to me. So we deal with a lot of intolerances in our practice, and that confuses me a little bit because, it confuses, I shouldn't say me, but it confuses the group of people working together on a case, including the patient, because they feel like they're having food sensitivities to things, but it's actually maldigestion. What are the reasons for maldigestion that might be, promoting these responses?
Well, sure. Let's start at the top, literally the top. I stand in front of a room recently of conventional medical doctors. I ask a simple question. It's patronizing. Yeah, it is. I say, but bear with me, folks. Bear with me. Where does digestion start? And so they're like, in the mouth. And I'm like, you're all wrong. It starts in the head. It starts when you anticipate that meal. You start engaging a part of our parasympathetic, right? Rest and digest. Rest and digest. Get it? Digest. And you anticipate it. This is truly Pavlovian. If you typically go have lunch at a certain time of the day in that certain room, often called the lunchroom, on your way there, you're anticipating it.
Right.
And you will start salivating. But you're not aware of these other things that occur. And particularly improving and enhancing stomach acid and the secretions there. And that also secretes digestive enzymes for proteins in the stomach. Now, what a lot of practitioners especially are unaware of is the biggest stimulus for releasing the digestive enzymes from the pancreas into the digestive tract is the amount of acid that leaves the stomach. So if you're not producing that acid because you're stressed, you're distracted, you are multitasking by working through your lunch at the desk, you shut down your digestion. You're eating on the way to work or school. You're rushing through lunch. You've got your meals in the evening. You get kids to go to choir and soccer. And
right.
Not sitting and being, I always joke, be at one with your meal. Take the time to chew it. This is why hamburgers became so popular for people working. You can one-hand it. Right. You can eat while you drive. Sorry. Got to get near there it is. In the camera. So they're not pre-digested, but they're pre-chewed. Hamburger is ground. You don't have to chew it. You don't need to cut it. And so those kind of sandwiches and things, wraps, one-handers. And so you're doing it while you're driving. You're not focused entirely on your meal. Right. And I come back to that a lot because people who think that they are being efficient by multitasking, and I'm sorry, folks, but you're fooling yourself. The only person who really benefits from that is yourself because you were entertained all day because you were doing stuff. But the truth is, and I'm stealing this from Stephen Covey, I'm allowed to do that.
Oh, yeah.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I will alter it my way, but the 7th habit is called sharpen the saw. And the tale of the woodcutter. There is more wood to cut today than any human could possibly cut. But he shows up under darkness At the first ray of sun, of light, he starts chopping wood. And he chops wood until it is not safe to continue in the darkness again at the end of the day, knowing that he cut wood as much as he could cut today. But the truth is, if he'd stopped midday, rested his muscles, got some nourishment in, sharpened the saw, although there was a period of time during the day that he wasn't cutting wood, there would have been more wood cut by day's end. Mm. And that's the fallacy of multitasking. And, my first degree is a commerce degree. And in those days, we didn't call it HR. It was called industrial relations. Mm. And we learned then companies like IBM and Xerox. Now, I worked for Xerox after I graduated. Mm. And they studied efficiency and effectiveness. And what was his name? Rob Peters, the Peter Principle. It wasn't efficient. People were better to take a lunch, clear their head, go for a walk, in terms of, corporate efficiency. So please, folks, take your time, enjoy your meal. You deserve it. You're working hard all day. And I really suggest that you think about chewing your food and taking the time. Now, I'm not saying you need to take an hour, but at least take that 10 minutes and enjoy the meal.
Well, it's really important for us. Like, Joe, I'm like always, thinking about supporting enzymes and the migrating motor complex and changing the foods and making adjustments. But this is something that's skipped over a lot, and it's incredibly important, as you said.
Yeah, and as with so many things that are, I'll come back to Stephen Covey in this one. You've got urgent and important, on the two axes on the chart. And the things that are not urgent but important, we tend to put off. Mm-hmm. And there's certainly no glamour in chewing your food well. But yet, we need to do that. And we fail to do it. We eat too much at one time, or we take in a lot of food or liquid with our meal, which dilutes our digestion. And these are problems with good digestion.
Does it really? Like, is that something that we need to be talking about? I know that a lot of parents will tell their kids that to not drink at all during meals. How strict do we need to be on that?
Well, it's a matter of quantity. You need, probably most people need a little bit of food. We need to dissolve the food that we're chewing. Mm-hmm. And the stomach will then churn it up and add some secretions. So that's why it's important to be hydrated before the meal. So the stomach can take the hydrogens from the water, H2O, and use those hydrogens to be the acid in the stomach. Okay. And the acid is only a problem if the lining of the tissue of the stomach is not insulated from the acid by a thick layer of mucus. And that's what you don't get when you're stressed, is you don't produce that mucus. So now Mr. Acid touches Mr. Tissue. And, it's touching something it shouldn't be touching.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And it can significantly irritate that tissue. And can that tissue damage and maybe subsequent terrain changes causing probiotic changes, can that be also a source of intolerance? Probiotics have a role in digestion as well, correct?
Sure. And especially at the end. But as we move through the small intestine, most of the bacteria there is managed by bile. And people who do not secrete adequate bile may have more trouble with overgrowth of microorganisms, especially in that small intestine while the food is being broken down. Until if it's broken down and not yet absorbed, it's called food for the bacteria. Mm-hmm. And so the bile keeps that in check. Again, the stress, being in the sympathetic mode, means you don't produce the bile. It's hard to produce good bile if you're dehydrated. It's hard to secrete good bile if you don't have healthy dietary fats. So if it becomes sludgy, it's hard for that bile to flow down and do its job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. That makes total sense. It's something I skip over a lot, this bile conversation, and it's incredibly important. And the times that I have really tuned into it based on the symptoms presented, it's been very helpful for the person. How can we know when we should be moving towards that phase 2, that step 2, that bile support? Is there any indications symptom-wise that this is going to be the thing we need to do?
Sure. The question I ask my patients is, do you have poor tolerance of dietary fats, oils, and grease?
Right.
So if fats comes from animals, oil comes from plants, and grease is either that's been held at a high temperature. And grease seems to be its own special problem. And if they say, yeah, Joe, I can eat 2 avocados, because that's a fair bit of oil in that. But boy, oh boy, if it's deep fried or fried in the pan, a quick stir fry probably isn't a big issue. Then I'm like, okay, if any of that is a problem, let's look at bile. And a lot of people have lost their gallbladder.
Yeah.
And it varies how much that affects their ongoing digestion on the long term. But if you have trouble with bile, you will not absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. But your healthy fats, it's very hard to get healthy oils and fat in our diet. You always will hear, oh, get that fish. It's got omega-3. But we don't eat the whole fish. We have this nice lean steak of fish meat that we then put on a grill. That oily fat skin, those big clumps of fat in the fish. Oh, we trim that icky stuff off. And then we grill it. So any fat and oil that was in it is left at the grill. There's very little omega-3 makes it to your plate.
Right.
And everywhere we turn, olive oil, it's the best. Avocado oil. And they are, and they're associated with good health, no doubt. But in places where people get dietary omega-3, and we do not, right? My grandma's flour, her bag of flour, it was actually a drawer in the cabinets. They had tin drawers that they made your flour and put it in.
Okay.
But they would check it all the time. It would go bad. Now, I had a bag of flour in my house for 9 years. And when we moved, my wife made me throw it out. She wouldn't let me keep it. 9 years. And it did never grow omega. It never grew a mealworm.
Wow.
Whereas I remember, I'm a generation older than yourself, but that flour would go bad. And it no longer does, because it can't even sustain omega. Think about that. Right. And so it's a problem that the flour had omega-3 because the wheat germ and bran was still in it. When we talk about whole wheat, even that is still already processed. Our chickens and our calves would have had omega-3 eating grass right at the shoots. Instead now, they're fed grains, barley and wheat and oats and sorghum, corn, that does not contain omega-3. So how to get it? Sure, you can buy expensive fish oils, and that's good. It's got its place. But if I take a proper dose of fish oil, that's 2 grams at a time. What am I carrying? Probably 30 kilograms of, fat tissue in my body between the central nervous system, my belly. 2 grams at a time, I'm going to change that. You have to get it from seed oils. And that's controversial now, too. There's another person out there selling their magic solution for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
That means no seed oils. No. Oh, come on. You've got to have a variety. Things like canola have omega-3, but they're a GMO chemical nightmare. But there's a cousin to it called camelina.
Okay.
And it's grown by some small, there's a few small cooperative farmers in the Canadian prairies growing this essentially organic product with a great omega-3 profile.
Really?
Again, very similar to flax, but you can cook with it. It's got a high smoke point. It's very safe. It stores easy, which flax doesn't. Hemp oil is another great choice, or eating hemp seeds. Walnuts have omega-3, not as good a profile. But you come around, I live in Calgary, folks, and you come around the south end of Calgary, where one of the world's leading horse jumping facilities is. And it's called Spruce Meadows. And you go to any of the tack shops around here, and you'll find this camelina oil in 20-liter pails.
Wow.
Because this is what they feed the $10 million show jumping horses, so that they get omega-3, because their joints take a beating, right?
Right.
Because they're fed grain, not grasses, that have omega-3. So
that's really interesting.
Get some omega-3, and it helps thin out the bile, right? You don't need much. If we do the blood testing on the fatty acids, 3% of the total fatty acids in your blood might be omega-3, if you're doing well. But when I see it tested, a lot of people are down at 1%. Their omega-6s, the bad guys, usually aren't very high. But the omega-9s are dwarfing it because of the olive oil.
Okay.
And avocado oil. So it's all about balance, folks. Balance.
Right. What's the name of the oil again? What's it called?
Camelina.
Camelina. Okay. Camelina oil. I don't feel like I know it. I don't think I've ever heard that word before.
Yeah, and it's not some crazy concoction. It's just a grain. Wheat has dominated. Wheat and barley have dominated. Now canola, which is a bit of a problematic crop.
No, definitely. So help me understand where we go next. I think that's a really great description of the intolerance risk. Now, I'm interested in how do we get to a place where food sensitivities are actually occurring? So can intolerances lead to food sensitivities? Can antibiotics lead to food sensitivities? What is the cause? How is this occurring?
Wow. Yeah, it's a good question. Anything that disrupts your digestion, it's an integrated system. So you can't think that you can alter one part of it without that having an effect upstream or downstream. Right. Probably the biggest issue is the integrity of the gut wall.
Okay.
So we're talking about the small intestine here. Mm-hmm. And that integrity, if it's lost, and I'll use this, see, the cells should be tightly bound like this. But if they're not, the immune system, let me get my glasses, there you are, can see the food passing through. Now, your immune system has identified it and you have a sensitivity. Mm-hmm. Now, keep in mind with the sensitivities, they're hard to observe. Even the intelligent observer will be challenged because it can take up to 6 days for that reaction to hit its stride. Mm. The antibodies have a half-life greater than 23 days. And so even if you only had that food occasionally, you could stay at a sustained state of irritation. Mm-hmm. But because it doesn't happen instantly, it's very hard for most people to figure out, oh, it was that. Because it's something you had 3 days ago.
Right.
And that's the problem. So the gut wall integrity, especially things like a viral infection,
right,
really can rip that apart. But the stress. Now, on the wall of the small intestine, we talked about the pancreatic enzymes a few moments ago. Very important. But that's like the first big part of digestion. Let's break these long chunks into small bits. But the final part of that are called brush border enzymes. On the wall of the small intestine, these smaller fragments will brush past enzymes that are hanging out and break apart. And so lactose intolerance, let's use that example because people are familiar. Mm-hmm. It means you do not have this enzyme called lactase to break apart it's two rings of sugar. And you have to break them apart by brushing past. If you don't break it apart, that cannot be absorbed, so it goes to the bowel and you get thriving yeasts. So, back to what you're saying, stress is a big part of it. You're not preparing the system.
Right.
And infections, lack of nutrients.
Sure thing. So are we calling this leaky gut? Like, is this where we're going here with the damage to the small intestine?
Well, I hate the term leaky gut, but
what do you like?
People understand the concept, so I use it. But yes, that in leaky gut, it just means that the integrity is so poor and that the foods have not fully disintegrated. Remember, if that food has fully disintegrated, there's nothing for your immune system to see.
Right.
So it kind of takes these two factors to occur at the same time.
Okay, so when we measure food sensitivity, what are we measuring? We're measuring IgG molecule, antibody molecule, combined with a food antigen. Is that correct?
Right. So the test, it really is pretty simple. I'm going to take some blood. We're going to put it in the centrifuge so that we spin it down and the heavy stuff goes to the bottom, the red blood cells. Mm-hmm. And the watery part stays on the top. Call that serum. Antibodies are in the serum. So we take that serum, pipette or siphon some off, and then in a plate of gel are embedded the puree of these different foods.
Okay.
In an order. And so then we'll put that serum on there, give it some time to, we say incubate, give it time to react in this gel. And then we have a way to measure those little piles of puree in the gel and say, hey, there's a lot of antibodies on that one and that one. Mm-hmm. And it's not unusual to have some level of antibodies against the foods. There's always going to be points in your life where your digestion isn't great and the integrity of the gut isn't great. But you should not, on an ongoing basis, have a continuing problem with an excessive amount of these antibodies. So when an antibody sees the antigen, boom.
Yes. So when we report on these labs, is it the number of antibodies measured or the number of antibody antigen complexes measured?
No, it is the antibodies.
Is it total antibodies that are measured?
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so these antibodies, now we've measured them, they're in our bloodstream. And now what happens in our system? You mentioned earlier about the settling into the tissues. of the antibody antigen complexes. So these antibodies are in our bloodstream. They're reacting with the foods, of course, and they go up. So is it the food antigen, the protein from the food combined with the antibody that settles into our tissues? Am I getting that complex right?
Sure.
What is the complex?
Again, there's two parts of it. Well, the complex is the antibody and the antigen.
Right.
Now, if your liver is, fabulous, if those complexes are cleared immediately, there's not much going to happen.
Sure.
But that's not most people.
It wouldn't show up on the test then, would it?
No, we only see antibodies that have not bound.
Exactly. Okay.
But they're waiting to bind. That's their job.
Right.
So
okay.
that antibody-antigen complex, as it circulates, releases inflammatory molecules. They're called leukotrienes and eicosanoids and prostaglandins. And those categories are all derived from omega-3 or omega-6 fatty acids. Those from omega-6, which are definitely more abundant than omega-3s, and those are inflammatory. And so you need a certain level of these omega-3s to balance them. That is what the steroids tackle, is these inflammatory molecules. So that's what your puffers are doing in your asthma. They're reducing that, how it's reacting in the airway.
Absolutely.
So that antibody-antigen complex, which is irreversibly bound, if it does settle, and it has an affinity for particular tissues in particular people. This is something we don't understand that well, but why does the one to gluten really like to go settle in the small intestine and then destroy it? That's celiac. We don't know why that one is, but we talk about back in the day rheumatic fever, and we don't know why you develop an IgG to a protein in that bacteria, and it only settles in the valves of the heart and attacks those.
Right.
That's one of the mysteries. But they have these specific things.
Yeah, they have affinity for the tissues.
And then others are much less specific, and they may settle in the skin and cause eczema, settle in the airway, cause asthma.
So now, once these occur, are they forever? Are food sensitivities forever? I need to know.
They are not. And there's a few things that occur. They can be if you keep fanning the flames. But if you take a break from straining your system, you improve the digestive breakdown of the foods so that they have truly disintegrated before they meet your immune system. And you heal that gut wall so that even if the foods are passing through, the immune system isn't going to see them. Well, there's no harm, no foul, or much less harm. But if you go back to doing what you did, you'll get to where you were. I promise you that. It's your immune system. You have memory. But if you stay below that threshold of intact food particles meeting your immune system, you're fine. So if you've healed, improved your digestion, watching your quantity and frequency, you can stay under the radar. But it's an exponential, it takes off if you wake up that sleeping giant. Some foods people will not be able to reintroduce. I'll be honest, it's not a assured thing.
Right.
And it was funny, it came up twice this morning with like talking to docs who were having issues with their patients. And one had avoided dairy very faithfully for a long time. And her numbers were very high. And she was like, well, is this test really that good? Because if I've avoided it, the antibody count should have come down some. But some people will inherently still be producing those antibodies. And that is the person who would not be able to reintroduce that food.
Right.
Yeah, that's why we don't recommend using this test to monitor compliance. There's just too many variables in that reading. I'll get some engineer patients who, it's their money. They're free to study themselves, but it's not my recommendation.
Right.
But they want to see how it's going. And there's just too many variables. You use this test when the symptoms are present that justify using the test.
Vitamin Lab revolutionizes personalized supplements, empowering health practitioners to create tailored supplement formulations that address each patient's unique needs. Bring personalized health to your practice and choose from over 200 professional-grade ingredients to create vitamin formulas that improve patient adherence and result in tangible outcomes. All ingredients are sourced from the world's most trusted suppliers, and Vitamin Lab provides hands-on support to help you formulate and launch personalization to your patients. Say hello to a new era of personalized supplement solutions. Go to getvitaminlab.com/personalized to save $100 off your first formula.
Okay, that makes sense. So basically, if the food is completely broken down and the small intestine integrity is intact, then the antigen that the antibody would normally react against, it's not going to be exposed to, because the food will then simply be broken down into its micronutrients. And so there's no actual physical antigen for it to respond to. So there would be no symptoms. However, if you did a blood test, you could still see circulating IgG antibodies. We just don't think that they would be causing significant harm because the food was so well broken down. Is that true? Is that a good summary?
Yes, that is true. And over time, though, that level of circulating antibodies will diminish.
It should come down. Yeah. It should come down.
But you can wake it up again by going whole hog on those foods.
Absolutely. Okay. So in this case, then, is there value in measuring, say, for example, zonulin or intestinal permeability markers or inflammation of the gut in a way, given that if we know they're occurring, we have a plan ahead of us already. We know we need to make sure the food's well broken down and the small intestine's healed. Should we also be considering these other measurements?
Well, zonulin's a tough one because what we had originally thought it was just this great indicator of the integrity of the gut wall. Turns out zonulin has other issues. And so it's not as specific to that as you would want it to be. So the conclusions you draw, just not as good as it's not as solid as it should be.
It's not a yes or direct
we all
yes or
got
no.
caught on that. We thought zonulin was this great thing, and then we all had to retract. And you see the reports for zonulin stating that here's some of the drawbacks to relying on this uniquely as a measure of gut wall integrity.
Right.
But let the story tell itself. Talk to the patient; they can tell you. Are you feeling better? Yeah. Well, that's a big sign for me.
Which is so incredibly common. I just love this test so much because we get such great results for the person's well-being.
And because it tells me something that even the intelligent observer would probably be hard-pressed to suss out. Type 1 allergy, there's no mom around who doesn't know her kid's type 1 allergies. Johnny ate this, they know. So
completely,
there's really a mystery with that. Whereas with the IgG, it's a real mystery for a lot of people. Now, there's foods that come up commonly, and people say, Joe, it's the usual suspects. It's dairy, wheat, and eggs. I'm like, yeah, it is. And I needed to prove that to this patient because they're like, yeah, I quit gluten for 2 weeks. You might have to quit for 3 months before you really see the inflammation calm down. And a lot of people see some benefit before that. But if you only quit the gluten and the dairy and the egg and the cashews and the almonds, because you drink almond milk every day, you're healthy. Unless you addressed all of them, you probably wouldn't see a significant benefit from getting rid of just one of the big offenders.
I'm so glad you went there and brought this up because we see egg whites all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about your position, in fact, with your own patients. And even with that group of people who really want to see this test, even though they don't have digestive symptoms. We talk about the impact of these antigen antibody complexes on skin and joint and mood and energy. So we do this test all the time, and we very commonly see egg whites. Has that been your experience? I've very rarely not seen egg whites, but I'm wondering about your experience because you've done way more tests than I have, and what your recommendation is for the communication of this to those people, because most people love eggs.
Well, what's not to love? Yeah, it's a bit of an issue. One of the things that people have posited over time is how come eggs? How come so much? How come the dairy? How come the gluten? Well, we get them all the time. So if at any moment, let's say it was just brief, you had a lack of integrity of the gut wall. If these are the foods you always have, it's a for sure that you're going to see an immune reaction to them.
Okay, that makes sense.
So yes, one of the criticisms of the test is, it just shows you what you're always eating. I'm like, yes. And that stuff is not doing you well.
Oh, it's a yes or a no. And then if it's a yes, it's how much?
I am not an anti-vaxxer. Let's make that clear right at the outset. I am not anti-pharma. I want the best of every group of science I can get. But we want to use it all intelligently and well managed. When we're very young, and then now through our youth, we get exposed to egg below the skin in some of the inoculations. And again, I'm not against them.
No, for sure, yeah. I understand your position.
I'm saying this might explain why we see egg come up so much, because at a very young age, it has been put to a place that it shouldn't normally be occurring, that my immune system would see egg in my muscles, in my muscle cells.
Wow, you're blowing my mind right now.
Is that one of the things that sensitizes us more to egg? We know with gluten, it's just that's the attraction to wheat. It is a great grain. It stores well, safely, as long as it's not wet. It's very nutritious. It's easy to grow, especially in places with weak soil. Look at Saskatchewan, the breadbasket of Canada. I mean, that soil, you can't grow a lot of vegetables there. It's not like Southern Ontario. And yet here, this wheat grows prolifically. So that's why the world has loved it. It has protein in it. The gluten is a very special elastic nature, and that's why bread tastes good. Right. And you cook it and you get those air bubbles in it. And it's nice and light and fluffy, and people can cook it in different ways. And what's not to love?
You're making me hungry.
But we get it all the time.
Right.
And I think we've got to this world where we have shreddies or wheat cereal for breakfast. It's a cracker snack or a cookie, a donut for your mid-morning snack. Your lunch is a pasta or a sandwich. Your evening meal, if it's not a pasta, then in any culture, pita, roti, naan, bread to sop up your soup. I'm not sure we were meant to have that much of it.
Good point.
And that's, people say, well, people have been having dairy all these years, and people have had wheat all these years. Yeah, but I don't think my granny would have let her kids eat a whole loaf of bread at one sitting.
Right, yeah.
Even, unless in harvest, if they're throwing bales, sure, you're going to eat. But otherwise, they would have had a much more balanced meal. But now you think of how much bread you get in a foot-long sub. A bagel, right? A bagel is pretty much half a loaf of bread.
Wow.
A few years ago, CNN did a CNN investigator did this really cool story. And she had gone to some large corporations that have recipes. So it was, in fact, Starbucks, McDonald's, a few other big names. And they shared certain parts of their recipes with her. It was about quantity. And that a bagel I get my years wrong, but I think this was 2008, and she was looking at 1988 or something like that. It was about 20 years. That the average size, the bagel serving had gone from 3.5 ounces to 8 ounces.
Oh my goodness!
The cooked bagel. So more than a twofold. It was Denny's spaghetti. That was the one that caught me. The sauce had remained just slightly increased, but the amount of spaghetti on the plate had more than tripled.
Whoa!
And so what we look at as a serving of spaghetti on a plate at a restaurant is probably 3 or 4 servings, just like rice. It's cheap. Put it out there, right? Fill them up on bread. Makes sense from a restaurant's point of view.
Right.
So we're getting a tremendous amount of it, and not enough good vegetables, and not enough variety. It's all this, just this. Let's have some other grains. Let's try some legumes. Let's try some other vegetables. Even my healthy patients, they're like, I get, and especially the elite athletes, they get really testy with me when I'm just like, you don't get enough variety. I get X fiber. I'm like, yeah. From 6 things.
Yeah.
Right? And how do you develop a healthy microbiome, which is all about diversity. And we keep looking for the quantity, right? You see the microbiome on a pie chart, these ones and these ones and these ones. And it's driving pharma crazy, trying to find the ideal balance, right? And it's because the joke's on them. It's not about that ideal quantity. It's about the overall sum total diversity.
Right.
How do you get that? The widest variety of plant matter in your diet. How do you get that? Every trip through the produce aisle, you stop, take a look. First thing you see that you haven't had in the last little while, or if you can't pronounce it, you got to buy it. Just two things. Don't have to buy a bushel, just some. Go home. There's a thing called the internet. It'll help you find a recipe for it.
Yeah, sure. Good idea.
Just a little bit. You do that, after 3 months, you'll have had 15 to 20 new foods.
I like that.
And they're like, Joe, I get stuff. I'm like, yeah, sure. When's the last time? And I use these ones all the time. When's the last time you had radish, kohlrabi, okra, and a turnip?
Oh, goodness gracious. Since I lived on a farm in Nova Scotia. Let's put it that way.
You get this,
Yeah, definitely.
So.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay, I really like that approach. Now, what I got from you there that I want to highlight is this antigen from egg white under the skin when you're young. However, if scores are still high, unlikely that it's not due to immune system reacting at the small intestine to this actual antigen, because the antibodies should have recovered. They should have been settled if they weren't continually being exposed to undigested protein, right? It's really undigested protein that they're responding to.
Yeah, by and large, all the immune reactions occur to proteins. We now know that it's not exclusive, but still that accounts for almost all of it. And people ask about cooking. Well, if I cook that egg, you can see it goes from clear to, a cooked egg white. And so that means some proteins have denatured. Surely it must be less reactive. In fact, there's a lot of good research, more on type 1 allergies, but the same story holds. They're more allergenic when they're cooked. So on our test, every food is raw for that reason, with the exception of polenta and couscous, because by definition they're cooked. The cooking you would never be able to cook most foods to a level that you could say, oh, I've cooked it to smithereens. The proteins aren't intact. Polenta, yeah, but you can't achieve that in a normal kitchen. 9 hours at a high heat. You're not going to do it.
Right. Okay.
But that's why they did it in other cultures. And I think the same reason British did mushy peas. It's very hard to digest food, but it's a great food, full of protein. It grows nicely, very, very weather forgiving on the farm. But a lot of people don't do well. 80% of people of European descent will have problems with green pea digestion.
Wow.
So if they overcook it, it now becomes easier to digest.
Right.
Same with corn becoming polenta. And we see on the test that the polenta is much less reactive. But you can't achieve that in your normal kitchen.
I need you to explain that to me again, because you said that. So it typically you see that reactions are higher if it's cooked, but when it's really well cooked, they're lower.
They could be higher. But in eggs, there is research on eggs being cooked and having higher reactions.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful to know. That's very, very, very helpful. Okay, thank you. The next place I wanted to go with this was your approach and the timings, because this is something that I try to personalize, but I don't know if that's the right thing to do. How long, if we do see a food sensitivity, say like this is the case, digestive concerns, bloating, gas, pain, food sensitivities come up, we have a series of maybe 10 things. What is your approach to this person? I understand supporting the different facets of digestion. What are the things that you really like to see and for how long?
Well, I want to see them feel better. And so we don't really fool around with reintroductions until they have been in a better place, stable and solid for a period of time. And stable and solid for at least a month, which my guideline is when I review the results with the patient, I say, come back and see me in 3 months. It'll take 3 months. In the first few weeks, you'll struggle to learn some, but there's, again, the internet is great at helping people. There's now a lot of alternative products. Some of them are awful, fake cheeses, just skip it. It's garbage. But, hey, and, remember, organic garbage is still junk. But, that aside, 3 months is kind of my minimum. But with that doesn't mean everything gets reintroduced at once. So if the numbers for dairy were very high, it might be 6, 9, 12 months before we get around to coming to the dairy again, because it's just going to take so long before they drop those antibodies to be able to stay under the radar. And it depends what the whole picture looks like. How much gut healing do I need to do? Or is this really just about these foods, a little bit of protein digestion, And that's why you see the nuts and the seeds and the grains and the legumes. They're all seeds. Now, to be a good seed, you need to be fully functional at some future date to propagate the next generation. What that means is the proteins in seeds are very highly conserved. So in the organic chemistry, we call that tertiary conformation. The third level of shape in a protein means it's really tightly wound so it doesn't break apart easy. Let's call it the simple thing. So they don't break apart easy. So they're viable in the future. That's their protective thing. So they are these single hardest molecules for us to break down in our digestion. That's why eggs are good. That's why milk is good. But that's why the nuts, seeds, and grains are a problem. They are the hardest molecules for our system to break apart and digest.
Fair.
So they're the ones that are going to typically be the biggest problem.
So contrast that with things that we very rarely see, which would be like animal proteins and fish. We very rarely see those. So that's because they're easier for us to break down?
Yeah. And a lot of people talk about, I have trouble digesting meats. Well, often that has more to do with, at the moment, maybe your bile and managing the fats in meats. But by and large, they do digest well.
Oh, that's a very good, very, very good cue. Yeah.
And those fragments of it are just not ones that our body likes to target.
Right. Okay, that's incredibly helpful. So we've broken down some of the categories I really wanted to talk about because we see so often the nuts, seeds, and legumes category being completely lit up. And so very much rarely the meats as lit up. But so the reactions are different mechanisms. Can we talk a bit about on your test, the bottom category, which would be kind of the miscellaneous, the yeast, the chocolate, sugar, coffee? What do you typically see in this category? And are there any patterns that you're picking up at all?
Sure. The yeasts, I absolutely believe if both brewers and bakers' yeasts are significantly elevated, that you might want to think, maybe there's a bit of cross-reactivity with gut yeast.
Okay.
And so is there dysbiosis? Absolutely see that kind of a relationship in a cross-reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other patterns we see a lot is, and on the expanded panel, we have two seaweeds. We have Alga espaguette and Alga wakame.
Right.
And then in miscellaneous, we have agar and aloe vera.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see agar elevated a lot. Same with the Alga espaguette. It's sea spaghetti. What these are used for, and most people aren't eating them a lot. And with the agar, we're in the lab, it's a Petri dish.
Yeah.
But agar is a very, very stable and hard to break down glycoprotein that is a gel. It's very slimy.
Mm-hmm.
And it is used as a thickening agent, doubly so in gluten-free products because they don't have that beautiful stretchy gluten.
Yeah, come on.
And so when you're buying your, she super duper organic, gluten-free, egg-free, dairy-free, flavor-free, snack bar, it's probably thickened with something other than gluten. So you'll get this. Soups, stews. We used to get these candies at Christmas, and they're half a slice of fruit, little half circle. Some of them, they're jelly. You got some sugar on them. Some had a little bit of icing in it. Yeah, that's agar.
Mm.
And so your gummy bears, but any of these healthy foods as well, soups and stews. And so you'll find the agar, the sea spaghetti, and because they're sustainable crops, they're seeing increased use in food processing. But you won't necessarily see them on the label. They're natural flavoring, natural coloring.
Okay.
Same with the cola nut. We see cola nut. Yeah, Coca-Cola. Mm-hmm. It was what was used to put the caffeine into the original cocaine-laced Coca-Cola. It also provided the brown color. But it is still used in highly concentrated forms as a food coloring agent. It is the source for caffeine in your energy drinks. They don't have the cocaine anymore, but, that's the story behind cola nut. It's very, very prominently used in, again, soups, stews, processed foods, maybe a bouillon, for coloring.
For sure.
A lot of beef bouillon is actually from hydrolyzed barley.
Mm. Oh, wow.
It's vegan.
Yeah. Funny. Funny enough.
So they need to make it brown.
You brought up a very important point there, Joe. It's about the cross-reactivity that sometimes is a bit baffling to patients. Can you talk to us a little bit about cross-reactivity and what that means?
Sure. So something comes up on the test that you've never eaten, but maybe a small segment of the protein in there looks very similar to a segment of a protein in some other food, some other molecule, some other thing. Remember, it can be inhaled. We're not measuring a lot of those things, but you can breathe in stuff that triggers your IgG, particularly molds. In this case, that little segment. Now, when we look at these proteins, some of them, they're massive, hundreds and thousands amino acids in a string, like a beaded necklace. The section you react to might only have 4 amino acids in a row, but typically it's between 8 and 12. And those don't have to be perfectly identical. They only need about 70% agreement. So let's say you were reacting to 10, this row of 10, only 7 of them need to be in the right spot. So, you think of these massive foods and the opportunity for similarities. A lot of seeds have proteins that we have generic names for. We call them 2S, 7S, 11S proteins, seed storage proteins. We've named some like gluten in wheat and hordein in barley, and similarly albumin in egg.
Right.
Do you know that 15% of the protein in wheat is actually albumin?
Really?
There's lots of opportunity for cross reactions there. But these other proteins, we haven't specifically named them other than identifying them by their molecular density, 2S, 7S, 9S. But they can be found in foods that seem to have no similarity to us. A kidney bean and a kiwi. But, again, in the seeds, you'll see so much else. And so that's the cross reactions. The best cross reaction story I have is it was an infant, a very young child who had what we call boiled baby syndrome. The skin is just peeling off. It's just sad to see these kids, their eczema is so bad. And the parents did the test, and they were very distressed because the only 3 foods that showed up were shrimp, crab, and lobster.
Okay.
The father is anaphylactic to shellfish, and they won't eat in restaurants where fish is being served, shellfish is being served. He's very dangerous for him. So they really were unhappy with that result. So I got called into the conversation with the practitioner, and I said, "Do you live on a farm?" "No." I said, "Old house?" Yeah. In fact, we have an earthen basement." I'm like, The shellfish and the mollusks and the bivalves, their muscles are made of a certain type of tropomyosin, muscle protein. It's the same protein in the exoskeleton of the dust mite and other insects. So their basement full of dust mite is inhaling the antigen that registers for us as a cross-reactivity in the shellfish.
Wow. Interesting.
I said, can you get out of the house for a period of time? And they said, yeah, actually, one of the grandparents lives not so far away and another town. We'll go there for a few days. And they said, yeah, within the week, that was just a whole new show.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's incredible. That's such great news for that baby. Holy.
It is. And we see some really, really amazing stories. The young fellows, 5 years old or so, who literally, oozing, dripping. That was a really sad case.
Yeah, but without a consult with you, that would have been very difficult for a regular clinician like myself to figure out.
It was, and it is. And I know there's a financial burden to the test. It's not without a cost.
For sure.
But I wish we had more buy-in from other clinicians. Family docs talk down about the test. But it's because they've not been taught it. And I'm not saying they're being ignorant. Why would they talk positively about something to which they have no experience? It would be malpractice. It's not what they're going to do.
Definitely. Yeah, I understand. Well, this has been like literally our chats that we have. This is like, I've always wanted to save them as a resource, and now I have it. So I'm so grateful for your time. Every question I have that people ask me, cross-reactivity, why eggs, what's the mechanism, how do we stop it, how long does it take? You covered it all, Joe. I'm so grateful for you.
Good.
Where can people find out more about your test and your company and you yourself?
Well, the test is easy to look at. It's at rmalab.com. We're a division of Life Labs. So you're in British Columbia. I'm sure you have listeners around the globe, but probably heavily weighted in BC.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're an accredited lab. There's good information there on the website. Myself, I practice at a clinic called Grassroots Naturopathic in Calgary. Limited practice, but I always love people knocking on the door.
For sure.
And I'm just rebuilding my own personal website, drklassen.ca, starting to launch some educational courses and things. This is my 20th year of teaching anatomy and physiology at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition.
Wow.
We're now having sign-ups for, I actually use the University of Calgary Med School's cadaver lab and take my students in and do some teaching there.
Wow.
So,
excellent. Well, that's so great. I'm so grateful for you to come on the show. I appreciate your time so much, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. For sure, you'll hear from me again soon. Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
thanks to all your listeners for listening in. I appreciate that. Dr. Deiser's just a heck of a great doc. I've always respected and loved my chats with him as well. I do. I love when I see him in my schedule. And feel free to hunt him down and ask him questions. He can send them to me.
For sure. That makes sense. Okay, nice chatting with you, sir. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk again soon.
Take care, everybody.
See you.
Thanks for joining us for today's discussion. What about today's podcast resonated with you? Be sure to tag at Dr. David Deiser and at Get Vitamin Lab. If you're learning from and enjoying this podcast, please let us know by subscribing to our YouTube channel and follow the show on Spotify and Apple. And don't forget to leave us a review. It's the best way to support our podcast, and it helps others find us. To learn more or book a demo to explore what personalization could do for your practice, please go to www.getvitaminlab.com/personalized.